yeah, we love it, and two of them say we have big issues and we need to sort that out. So what the committees or what the partnership's asking for is saying that if you approve this in principle, that's the feedback they're looking for at this point in time. So if there's, if there are concerns about parts of it that you want to put back, the committee can still discuss those and weigh those prior to putting something back for council's approval. If all the municipal members approve this in principle and say, yeah, we're good, then you'll see this back in front of you again for that formal and final, yeah, this is going to be the new task force. If there are large concerns, then the Kneehill Regional Partnership is going to have to weigh what those are and debate and discuss those and alter the proposed terms of references to go back to the municipalities or not, depending on what that group of elected officials determines. But I think that that covers the main alterations in what's being proposed by the Kneehill Regional Partnership. These terms of reference were approved by that body to come forward to the councils. And so I think with that, if there's any questions, and I'll be more than happy to field those.
Okay, Councillor Christie.
I guess my question, would it include staff at the hospital too? I think at times they're short of nurses and stuff at that facility, so everything else isn't functioning well either.
So I believe under the proposed scope that would not be included because I don't. It's let me dig up the exact section here, but there is a portion.
That's an AHS responsibility.
Correct. Yes.
Mind you, Dr. Recruitment isn't actually our responsibility either, but the province has indicated that they are now ready to get involved in rural doctor recruitment. They have some programs out, but I don't believe, well, I know that our area is not the one that is being, one of the areas that's not being looked at, so. Yeah. Mr. Hogan, I can't read what's on the chat, but if you could read it and.
That's still the original.
Oh, that's the original one? Okay, sorry. Okay, are there any other questions for Mr. Hogan? What can you see that for?
Without my glasses. I have a question.
Okay, Deputy Reeve King.
So, in the conversation within the partnership, there was pretty broad spread support for the idea that the scope of retention would extend beyond this existing clinic, and that there would be support for supporting medical professionals, doctors in Acme, Carbon, Trochu, wherever that might happen to occur.
Yeah. Through the chair to Councillor King, there was a fair amount of discussion on that, and I'll maybe defer a bit of the question to Councillor McGee as the chairperson of the partnership. My take on the discussion is that a number of our partner municipalities would only look to be a membership if the scope was expanded. I'll leave it to Councillor McGee to assess whether that's a fair statement I've made or not.
You want to jump in there, Councillor?
Sure.
McGee?
I don't have anything new to say. Mike hit it dead on. There's a couple of municipalities that are very reluctant in the scope that it is at this time. They wanted it to see if we could include placement in their villages to be part of the definition, which we thought was not for our partnership to do, but for the task force to determine whether that would be something they would look at or not. So yes, everyone participated well in what they thought it should look like without guaranteeing that they would be part of it. But everyone participated and thoroughly contributed to the final pieces here.
Deputy Reeve King.
So just as follow-up then, so it sounds to me, my understanding is that the task force would ultimately be responsible to determine whether they would do retention activities in the outlying communities, so our partners. So they're going to commit to putting this task force in place and being a part of the process. And then the task force decides it's not willing to support those retention efforts in outlying communities. What happens to the task force? So we're committing them to a process that says, yes, we will consider it, but what happens with, now you've given the task force independent discretion and decision-making capability, and they decide that's not something they're going to focus on. So does that then allow those partners to remove themselves? I see there's a place in here that says that member communities can remove themselves within 6 months' notice. So I'm just thinking about the viability of the whole task force and that independence that you're giving them to make the decisions and not including it in one of the principles or the directives that they have to operate under. You understand?
Yes, I do. And we are hoping that it's written well enough that if only 3 municipalities want to be part of the task force, then that's the task force.
Through Mr. Chair, to part of the purpose is written in here. It was very specific that it was to establish ongoing healthcare services to the member communities within Kneehill County. And that was done in relation to making sure that it wasn't just focused on the Three Hills Clinic. There's at least one municipality who has essentially already pulled out of the doctors, the current task force, although that hasn't happened in actual application. Their council has gone that direction. There is a second one that I believe is right there with them, maybe not as formally, but whether it's the current task force or this one, as members pull out, the remaining task force will have the question posed to them whether they retain viability or how even their funding would work. So as an example, if all the members are paying in on a per capita basis, and some pull out, that's going to be less money that the group has to work with.
Deputy Reeve King?
I guess, so that is a concern to me that, you know, we're writing some things like quorum's going to be a minimum of 4 task members. What if we don't have 4 task force communities that are willing to participate? So I'm just trying to say, is there rationale behind the idea of sort of placing that purpose more firmly into the agreement and taking away some of the flexibility that the task force has in terms of the ability to decide in which communities they're going to apply their work?
So through the chair to that, if there is some desire to strengthen the purpose, you know, it is written that the default is they're looking at all the communities, so that should be the default. That can be strengthened if that's a desire. Some of the other points is if at the end of the day there's 1 or 2 or however many members that decide not to participate, then there might be some tweaks required to the terms of reference themselves, and that's, you've identified one already in terms of the quorum. Although if there's 6 members, if 2 or 3 of them decided not to participate, then I think the question would be, does that mean that is there even a task force going forward? So there'd have to be, either way, there'd have to be some additional discussion on those fronts.
Yes, Councillor McGee.
And how I understood our question and our reasoning for all of this, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, but we felt that it was best to write this document as though everyone was on board. And then the idea is that it's passed on and owned by the task force. The partnership will no longer own this document or be part of of it. And so if changes happen to what the task force looks like, they can then change this document to suit what they now become.
So just,
Is that right?
I may just provide a clarification on that.
Thank
So
you.
this document or the terms of reference would be approved by the municipal councils. So the task force would not have the ability to unilaterally change their own terms of reference. Any change to the terms of reference would have to come back to the municipal member councils.
Just not through the partnership.
Right.
Deputy Reeve King?
Sorry to be such a problem on this one, but, and the other thing is that the existing Recruitment and Retention Committee has pretty much acknowledged the fact that the recruitment side of this whole process is out of our hands. And so, do we want to consider taking that recruitment portion out? Some of what we do helps the medical clinic in the process of recruitment, but we are more focused on retention now than we are on recruitment, because basically we've been told this type of committee does not get involved in recruitment activities. So again, we're sort of casting in stone some of these principles, and one of the principles that I read in this thing is around recruitment, and I'm not sure that's an activity that the existing committee's involved in much anymore, and going forward likely will not be. So again, that's just a question.
So through the chair, the partnership did have discussions around that topic. They settled on these for, I think, a couple of reasons. One is, you know, currently we do have a good contingent, and I think the parties would agree with the statement you made that primarily now it's about retention. They did want to keep it open that in the future, you know, that hasn't always been the case, and we're not sure it'll always be the case in the future on some of those activities. So there was a future component to that. The other one that when they tied into that particular discussion was around they wanting to make sure that they didn't duplicate AHS efforts when it came to a lot of the recruitment processes, with still recognition that there are elements of recruitment that can occur from a committee like this. So a lot of the AHS recruitment is bringing in for lack of a better term, is bringing in foreign doctors or doctors from outside the province, from outside Canada. And I would agree, and I think the partnership agrees, that there's no real role for this committee on that front. That is completely a duplication of Alberta Health Services efforts. They put a lot of time and money into those recruitments. What they did want to see is that this task force would still continue to be community boosters. So when Alberta Health Services is bringing in that physician from wherever they're coming from, and is got 2 or 3 communities that are a potential for it, that this group could be a liaison or a group of community boosters to show off our community, and do one of the call it a sales pitch as to why you would choose Three Hills or Acme or Trochu or wherever, you know, why you would choose that instead of pick any other community in the province, right? So they did see a role in that element. The other recruitment effort that they wanted to leave the door open to, which is in the scope of activities there, is that there is a lot more freedom outside the AHS process to recruit locally trained doctors. So those grads coming out of the U of A, the U of C, are not bound by a lot of the same things that the foreign doctors that AHS is attracting are bound by. So they have a lot more, they're pretty much free agents, to simplify it. And so they wanted to leave the opening for the task force to maybe look at development or targeting locally trained doctors, or putting in incentives for them. Some municipalities, most of the ones I'm familiar with are in the northern part of the province, but they'll do things like they'll assist medical students with their tuition in return with a return service agreement. That, you know, once they graduate, they have to commit so many years back to the community. Like I said, that's not an uncommon thing in the northern part of the province. I don't know about this area or lower, but they wanted to leave the door open to some of those activities regarding local doctors, that there is a lot more flexibility and freedom to chase. but they did agree that the group should not be duplicating AHS efforts. That was a strong push.
So if there's a municipality that's looking to bring in a doctor for, say, once or twice a week into a clinic that they have provided, how would this recruitment thing work for them? They would have to go to an established clinic and see if they've got a doctor there that would be willing to come into one of the communities for 1 or 2 days a week. Just trying to get that figured out.
There's an openness here into how it would work. So, for example, if there was the ability or the resource capacity for the Three Hills Clinic for one of them to go into a community a day or two a week, that can be worked out with them. There is an openness here, though, that if a community, say Carbon as an example, I'm just hypothetical, is if Carbon found somebody that, say, wanted to come out of a clinic in Drumheller or was looking to locate in the area to do something a day or two a week, under these terms of reference, in order to facilitate that, the committee would have the same, or the task force would have the same ability to offer them a type of bonus or retention bonus as they do the doctors coming into the clinic here. So that would be a function that would be open to the task force. It's just the only difference is that it no longer has to be tied to the Three Hills Medical Clinic. Now that doctor coming in, and this is where the terms of reference do not get into that level of detail or specificity, because I saw that as being a bit out of scope. Any doctor looking to do that is going to be essentially affiliated with a clinic of some sort. So whether that's, in Acme, it might be a clinic in Calgary, in Carbon, it might be a clinic in Drumheller, or they might choose to affiliate with this clinic so that they have somebody for their overhead, for their access to the appropriate medical programs and document filing, admin support to do bookings and billings and all that sort of stuff. So it really is, it can be a similar process, and it's being left a bit open to the task force to determine what that is, because if you're looking to they didn't want to confine the task force to the point where they had no flexibility, and so they wanted to leave it in there. If you've got a doctor that is, say, going to come into an Acme for 2 days a week, are you going to offer the same retention bonus as you are to a doctor coming to the clinic here that's 5 days a week? And so the partnership didn't want to get into that level of detail, but they can leave that to the task force to determine and justify that, yes, we are, or no, it's going to be 40% of what we would offer here. Right, for 2 days versus 5 or whatever that is. So they've left some of that flexibility and that figuring that stuff out to the task force itself.
Deputy Reeve King.
Okay, so part of the whole process that we've been engaged in here to this point, my understanding, is the attempt to bring enough doctors into the community who are not currently serving necessarily within Alberta or wherever, and so that we can have doctors for our residents. So we're already sort of walking a fine line or a tightrope as far as one of the provisions within this thing is we're not to provide subsidies or funding to private business. All doctors are in a private business. So what happens when, I'll pick on Trochu, since Trochu decides they're going to bring a doctor from a medical clinic in Olds, an established doctor, been in practice for years, just going to pop into Trochu 2 days a week. Are we now subsidizing a business that's already established and set up and serving residents from Olds, or are we not? And so this really gets gray and muddy, right? Like, we're already walking a pretty fine line in terms of what we're doing. In recognition that every time a professional sets up a business, that is a private business. Even though it's publicly funded medical care, it's still a private business. And so, I mean, we're really starting to muddy the water, and we're not gonna get all the answers today, but to me, I have a lot more questions than I have answers right now. So I guess I'm looking forward to more clarity as the process goes forward.
Through the chair, on that particular one, there is some strengthening that could be done to that statement. The partnership did not want to limit the ability or the current program of providing retention bonuses to doctors and other medical professionals. But they absolutely, and I think it was fairly unanimous support, they absolutely did want to limit the, and I'll use Three Hills Medical Clinic here because they're the only example right now, is if they wanted the Recruitment and Retention Committee to buy a piece of software for them, the group said, no, that's not the role of the committee. The clinic is a private interest and they need to cover that themselves. And so that was really where they were focusing on. I agree that part could be beefed up in the terms of reference, but that was the intent, is that still open to provide those retention bonuses to individuals, even though those individuals are set up as private businesses, but not to be subsidizing, in that example, if Carbon was going to bring in somebody to practice a couple days a week, the proposed task force would not be contributing funds to establish the office and the exam room and do the construction in that component. So that would be the subsidy. So they wanted to limit those activities, but not limit the ability of the task force to provide the retention bonuses that are currently taking place.
Yes, Councillor Cunningham.
So just so it's clear in my mind, it looks like previously, there was no set dollar figure that the task force asked for, that they would just make funding requests. So I'm just wanting to be clear, the financial implications to Kneehill County would be, if this is adopted, we would be funding $10,000 a year, is that correct?
If this was adopted, that is correct. Kneehill County is already the majority funder of the current task force, so whenever they do funding calls, we are the ones who put in far and away the most money to that. So when you're dealing with the retention bonuses that are getting paid out, most of that is being paid out by the county.
So if like we talked earlier, like if we lose a partner member, does that change the amount of money that Kneehill County would be responsible for in this task force?
Through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Cunningham, it could. And so that's a discussion that would have to take place as to whether the remaining members would simply up their contribution or whether the task force would have to operate with a reduced budget.
And that's assuming that we would be part of it. Because we
Correct.
could opt out.
That's correct.
Deputy Reeve King.
I did say I had asked my last question, but Councillor Cunningham's question brings up another thought of mine. So what happens if current partners withdraw from this task force now with the funding that's in place? So there is an existing funding envelope that's there. If a community or communities decided to withdraw, is there an expectation that there would be a reimbursement of previously contributed funds or not?
So through Mr. Chair, I guess I need to ask a clarification on that. I think there's two scenarios. If the new task force terms of reference are approved, it's stated in there the current funding that's held by the current task force would go to this task force. And so I think while it wasn't, I'm not sure that it's explicitly stated anywhere, my read of the conversation is everyone was agreed that no, the money's there for the task force. And a large part of that, I think, was based on the idea that the money the task force currently has in place is essentially already spoken for and spent. So there isn't, they might be sitting with, and I think it's 140,000-ish in the ballpark in their account, so to speak. All of that money is essentially committed. And so there is a recognition that there's not a refund, or if a group chooses not to be a part of this. The current terms of reference, which are not strong by any means for the existing task force, doesn't really cover that. And so I think that if a group withdrew from the existing task force, there'd be a question there. The pushback that, no, that money's already committed, you can't have it back. That'd be a discussion for the member municipalities to undertake, I think, because that I've seen, that process is not codified anywhere. But there was, as I said, there was discussion at the Kneehill Regional Partnership that essentially, as it gets to that component where the existing dollars from the current task force would be transferred to this one, in purpose, was done on the understanding of the group that essentially every penny the current task force has is already committed to retention bonuses being paid to doctors. Yeah, not paid yet, but committed to.
Seems like there's a lot of questions, unanswered questions. What is council's wish?
So if I may, Mr. Chair, through you, if council's good with this in principle, you can approve it in principle. If based on the discussion you just had, though, you want to send it back with feedback, you're able to do that as well. And so one of the options you'd have is that, council direct administration to return the terms of reference to the KRP and ask for additional strengthening, or whatever word you want to use, around the purpose and clarity of subsidization of private businesses, as an example.
I think this is fairly vague right now, and maybe that was intentional to be vague, but I don't really like making decisions on vague information. Deputy Reeve King?
I do have to give credit to the partnership. This is a difficult endeavor that they've set for themselves to try to, write a new set of terms of reference. You have my respect for getting to where you are at this point. I do think there are some unanswered questions in here, and I'm not sure necessarily that they'll come up in conversation in all the member municipalities, but I think there are some things that yet need answers. And so I'm open to direction for how we might proceed from here. You've heard my concerns. I'm sure that given further conversation, I might have more, but anyway, I'm not sure I'm prepared to go forward based on what's in front of us right now.
Councillor Christie?
Oh, I believe it's somewhat vague. I also realize that we're in a competition to recruit professionals, whether they're private businesses or not, but we need them. There has to be some community sales or promotion that you see other communities doing that we're in competition with. So I'm not sure that a cash bonus is the answer, but certainly community promotion needs to be funded and supported, I think. But I don't know at what level, whether it's a per capita thing or a municipality thing, I don't know. But I think there's room for some kind of a program there for sure.
I do believe that this time there is a chat thing in the Councillor FOIP's chat box, but I can't read it from here, so if somebody else wants to do that. Look behind you.
I do not feel comfortable with the information provided to make an informed decision at this point.
Thank you for that, Councillor Forbes. I feel your sentiments. Deputy Reeve King.
So, based on the feedback that you've heard, is it possible to take this back and just try to clarify some of those areas of concern? Or, I guess I'm asking for maybe some guidance on where we should go from here.
Through the chair to Deputy Reeve King, so that was the intent behind this and asking the municipalities to first approve it in principle was not to bring it forward for final approval today. It was actually in anticipation that questions like this might come up. If everybody was relatively good and said, yeah, we're good with this and we can approve it in principle, then we'd know that there were no further discussions needed by the partnership, right? In anticipation that there would be some of these things, the request to the municipalities was to, again, not fully approve it, just in case some of the members had concerns and wanted to send it back to the partnership, whether that was for clarity or they had a very philosophical opposition to some or all of the reference or terms. So it's an anticipated part of the process. And so if council wants to do that, then rather than council approving these in principle, then what we'd recommend is that council direct administration to, we'll come up with the wording properly in a moment here, but essentially that you're directing administration to request that the Kneehill Regional Partnership reconsider and strengthen parts of the terms of reference. Specifically, I think there were 3 areas that council identified, which was the regional purpose, in strengthening that, strengthening the clarification around if a member leaves, what happens to the money, and strengthening the wording around what qualifies as a private business interest versus what doesn't. Leaving that door open that the current retention bonuses paid to doctors could stay, making sure that's not caught up in the not wanting to fund specific clinic operations.
And then just maybe some clarification around, sorry, and maybe some clarification around the intent of the recruitment.
Okay. So what type of, and this is, I'm asking so we can pass this on to the partnership through the chair. What clarification would council be looking for on that front?
Well, I think that if you talk to the existing committee members, we would acknowledge the fact that we don't really see a role for this committee in recruitment. The role that we play in that is more a support role to the community or clinic that's doing the recruitment. So ways to help them attract that doctor and help them to understand that there is some support to retain them. And it's a fuzzy area because AHS and the medical clinic really are involved in doing the recruitment. They make the approach to the doctor, they evaluate that doctor, they decide completely on their own whether that doctor suits to be in this clinic or not, or whatever clinic they happen to be coming into. And then once all that decision-making process is done, then the existing committee gets involved in offering them retention, sort of that retention side of things. So if you stay this long, this is what happens. If you stay this long, this is what happens. These are the kind of incentives that we have available to keep you here long term. So really, the most we do in the recruitment process is to meet and entertain that doctor and showcase the community for them. That's about it. Beyond that, we get involved, once that doctor has committed to this clinic, then we're getting involved in terms of offering them retention side benefits rather than anything in the recruitment part. So that's where I think we need to just, I heard what you said about being supportive of the efforts to maybe train local students as doctors to come back to the community and providing support to medical students. That could be seen as recruiting doctors to the community. It's outside of AHS and it gives us more flexibility. And then being supportive of the clinic in terms of maintaining and retaining those doctors. But that's the things we're doing already, right? So I don't know. I think there needs to be some clarity around that recruitment word, because really this task force will never recruit a doctor. That'll be done by the clinics. That'll be done by AHS.
Councillor McGee.
So to argue further to that is if it's only about showcasing our community, we as a council are already committing so far, and we'll see where strategic planning goes, but according to the prior strategic planning, in economic development, and that would cover that piece. Ideally, that would cover that piece for all types of businesses, including doctors. So I really can hear the point of what you're saying to that expanded extent as well.
Deputy Reeve King.
We acknowledge the fact, and we have to, that we're in a competition for doctors, right? We're competing with other communities, and so really, to this point, that committee has, because we haven't been able to actually actively go out and recruit doctors, we've been just trying to support the clinic in their efforts to actually get a doctor to land and stay here. And so we have been way more active on the retention side than we have been on the recruitment side. The economic development part of this whole thing is if we don't have doctors, we don't have people wanting to move here. And so it's really critical that we have doctors in the communities, and I say communities, not just our medical clinic here in Three Hills, but in all of our communities. And I think there are a number of ones out there, including Trocia, that would say that having doctors not be in the community is a disadvantage. And so I guess I think we need to clarify more about that recruitment side. I don't know if that helps or not.
Very much so. Thank you.
My concern is now that the province has seen a need for rural doctor placement, again, we'll be competing with someone with far deeper pockets than what our municipalities can deal with. It would be nice if they could partner up with the province and show the need, and maybe you can get one doctor to serve 2 days in one community, another couple days in another community, vice versa, whatever that looks like. But recruitment is very difficult for this committee to go ahead and try to even pull without help from either the province or AHS. And AHS, I do believe, has already stated that our allotment for doctors here at this clinic is fulfilled. Not to say that we can't try to talk AHS into more, but I'm not sure if that would even work, so. That's a tough subject.
Well, and in all honesty, I thank you for the appreciation of putting this piece together was very difficult because of all those things, and those things are constantly changing as we're having the conversation as well. So just for clarification for you guys, we decided we were tasked with this as a partnership group by our councils to find a terms of reference for it. we weren't asked to find what the future intent of municipalities are. All municipalities said, yes, please work on their terms of reference. So that's how we framed it. But I challenge that maybe that needs to be expanded on for us to proceed. And that might be a conversation the partnership has to have.
Well, I appreciate the work that the committee has put in, but it's a really tough subject to broach at this time because there's just too many questions out there and not enough answers. Deputy Reeve King?
I don't see anything of this that we're asking you to do as being easy. And as such, I want to acknowledge and let you know that I appreciate the efforts that are being made by the partnership in this area. And I certainly, I wouldn't want to be you, having been tasked with this job, but I certainly know that it is appreciated.
Thank you. We know that, but thank you.
So we've sort of got a new motion kind of on our screens. Is there any comments to that? Can Carrie see it? Oh, Carrie can't see it. So maybe would it be appropriate for me to read what is kind of on screen now? Okay. That council requests the Kneehill Regional Partnership to clarify / strengthen wording contained in the proposed Kneehill Medical Services Recruitment and Retention Task Force terms of reference, specifically in the areas of subsidies to independent businesses, termination of membership by a municipal member, the scope of recruitment activities, and the strengthening of regional purpose. Okay, there's something in the chat, is there?
No, she posted our.
Oh, okay. I didn't think my eyes were getting that bad, but they must be. Go ahead, Councillor McGee.
First off, thank you to administration for being able to concisely say what we've tried to say for the last several minutes here. So, and therefore I would like to move as written and as the Reeve had read.
Okay, so you're proposing a motion as what is printed on screen that I had just kind of tried to spit out. Is there any discussion to that motion? Is there anything else that should be added? Councillor Cunningham.
Can I just ask, in the termination of membership by a municipal member, would that also encompass if that dollar figure would change for the remaining municipal members? Or would that just cover that?
Through the chair, I think that's one, my suggestion would be to just leave that for now, because I think really what we want to do there is really, based on what I heard, clarify that if a member leaves, the dollars they've already put in are in, that they're not getting those back. I think my recommendation to you would be to leave the other component that you just mentioned, because it'll be different based on, you know, if one municipal member pulls out, then you've got a question of, does the fee go up or does the group operate with less? If 4 pull out, then you've got a question of, is there even a point to the 2 continuing on, right? And so I think there's the circumstance when that happens could be different based on what takes place.
The circumstances could sure be different depending on which partner pulls out too.
And that's true. You know, if it's the county that opts not to go forward, then there's a, you know, the biggest source of funding for that group leaves with it. Right?
Okay, so we have a motion before us. Is there any more discussion to that motion? Seems not, so I will call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. Yeah, we can do that. Kudos to the group for bringing this forward, but we would sure like to see a little more information. Oh, no, we don't. Okay, our next agenda item is council and committee reports. We have a couple written reports. Kneehill Housing Corporation, Police Advisory Committee, Kneehill Regional Partnership Steering Committee, and Marigold Library. Oh, and the Alberta Provincial Police Transition Study Engagement Session. Any questions? So that's the meeting that you, Councillor McGee, attended, the provincial transition study. That's the one that was in Strathmore? Yeah.
Yeah, if I may just add, I think there's hundreds of things that could be said and asked and worried about, but my number one go away from Strathmore takeaway was that we still, in anything that we do, need to start advocating for how we define rural. It really concerns me greatly that as they're making these plans, rural does not regard the cost per mile square or it being so isolated. I made that point twice very firmly, and it was recorded, so I'm hoping that happens. But I think if we could have more and more people to recognize that that is what needs to be taught whenever the province is changing anything, that recognition of what rural really is. We don't mean small town Red Deer. We mean isolated farms and small villages and hamlets, and that concept is still very foreign to the bulk of people who are making these decisions and writing these reports.
Does anyone have any questions? If not, does someone want to make a motion for the reports to be received as information is presented? Yes, Councillor Cunningham.
I would make the motion that council receive for information the council follow-up action list as presented. Nope, sorry, wrong one. No, okay. No, I'm going to change that. I would make the motion that council receive for information the council and committee reports as presented.
Okay, thank you. We have a motion to receive council and committee reports as presented. Is there any discussion or questions? Not. Oh, Councillor McGee.
I do have one question. Given that we use this new format of reporting, do you still want me to include the minutes when they do arrive, or is that like too repetitive?
Personally, this is good for me. The minutes don't always include everything that you've included here, so. But it's not a big deal. I mean, those minutes can be presented, and if there's any questions arising out of the minutes, if it's not a bother. I don't know what the rest of council feels.
I guess I would say that I appreciate what you have here, and it's probably more than adequate, but to include minutes as they come in really is just supplemental information. So I would say, why not, right? I haven't used this new format myself yet, but it's certainly, I appreciate what both you and Carrie presented, so.
Okay, well, we've got a motion before us to receive for information as presented. I'll call the question. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. We have our council follow-up action list pre-circulated. Are there any questions dealing with that? I see there's a lot of completed stuff on there, so somebody must have been really, really busy. So if we're good with that, could somebody make a motion to accept for information as presented? Councillor McGee.
Yes, I move to receive the council follow-up action list as presented.
All righty, we have a motion before us to receive as presented. All those in favor? And that is carried unanimously. That brings us to the end of our open council. We will recess at this time and then come back to closed session. I will now ask for someone to put us in closed session. We're going to be dealing with personnel matter under FOIP Section 17 and a couple of legal matters under FOIP Section 2.4. Councillor Christie.
So moved.